Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who was born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, 'But you, Bethlehem, in the hand of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me that I may come and worship him also." When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. This is the word of the Lord.
My sermon today is simply called, "What Child Is This?" In 1865, the manager of an insurance company in England named William Chatterton Dix fell ill, fell into a severe depression, and almost died. During that ordeal, he began to read the Bible in earnest for the first time in his life, and he fell in love with Christ. And that Christmas, he wrote a poem called "The Manger Throne," which 6 years later was published for the first time in a Christian hymnal, after someone had set the poem to the tune of the English folk song, the traditional English folk song, Greensleeves. You know this poem turned song as the Christmas carol, "What Child Is This?" The story of the wise men that Katie just read to you from Matthew's Gospel, which Dix references in the poem with the words, "So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh," if you know the song, it's always fascinated me. These are the mystery men of the Christmas story. The best guess of scholars is that they were astrologers from Persia who perhaps saw a new star appear in the constellation Virgo and somehow knew to see it as a sign of something global. I mean, who goes to a different country, especially in those times, to celebrate the birth of their king? It's strange. But it's intriguing that while almost no one in Israel has a clue yet, right? A few shepherds, right? Are told, hey, this is a big deal, and they go and they see. So almost no one in Israel has a clue, and yet these magi come maybe 1,000 miles, traveling for maybe 2 months, and literally fall down and worship this infant boy and go home. And Herod's not a real deep thinker. All he sees is competition on the earthly king scene. So even though he seems to accept the prophecies from Micah about Christ being born in Bethlehem because he's wheedling this information out of people, it makes you think that if Herod had really thought deeply, he might have thought, so if God prophesied the birth of this child, what child is this? But he doesn't. He just sees a problem for himself. So what child is this? As simple as that question seems, I think it can be a very interesting question to wonder about today. I mean, do people even wonder about this question? Is anyone asking it? And if they are, in what way and to what conclusions? I think the first way the question is asked today is really that it simply isn't. You know, more and more people in our culture have really given up or are giving up on the Christian faith. One of the reasons, I think, for that, not the only one, but still a significant one, one of the reasons more and more people are giving up on the Christian faith and not asking questions like this is because of the attitudes and behaviors they're observing in many Christians today, in our culture. A lot of that is because Christians have been very busy in the last few decades embedding Jesus into the workings of temporal politics rather than recognizing that Jesus is the Lord over all human affairs. And rather than recognizing Jesus as the one who can lead us out of the darkness that people on all political sides are trapped in, because they're human beings. Now, politics makes a poor topic for an Advent sermon, admittedly. So suffice it to say that fewer people than ever these days are asking what child this is. And unfortunately, Christians have become kind of a major contributing factor to that. The good news is that Christ is still the light that began to glow in that manger that morning, and he can still change our lives in profound ways. And should we let him change our lives in profound ways, then someone else might see this and begin to wonder about it. They might begin to wonder what child this is, what Christ this is that can have such a profound effect on our lives. Linda and I have often observed and talked about the fact that one of the best ways to witness to Christ is just to let him keep working in you. Just to actually take the journey. You know, sometimes you can't convince people of things when it comes to faith things. But you can always take the journey. And so I would say to you this morning, so take it deeply, even in a culture that may not want to hear it anymore. It makes me think of my oldest brother, Joe. You may have heard me talk about Joe. I'm the middle of 5 children. My oldest brother, Joe, lives out in California. He's the one who's been taking care of my mom all these years until she recently moved into assisted living. When I came to Jesus as a teenage boy, my brother Joe ridiculed my faith to the point that for years and years and years, when I would see him, I would simply not bring it up. I wouldn't say anything about my Christianity or about Jesus in my life or any of that kind of stuff. And then over the next decade, something happened and something didn't happen. What didn't happen is he didn't find the way in life, and he was left still overwhelmed and frustrated and wondering, what in the world is life about? What did happen is that I still took the journey, and Linda and I still took the journey, and he watched that. And then one day, after a lot of years went by, he began to wonder if the Jesus that had brought new life to his little brother could bring new life to him too. So, you know, it takes years and years sometimes. So if you're frustrated, maybe you're trying to share your faith with people in your family and stuff, you think, man, it just doesn't ever seem to get anywhere. Let me tell you something, it just takes years and years and years sometimes a lifetime. But if you're telling people that the meaning of Jesus is that they have to believe in your political party or your version of America, they may never wonder. And the tragic thing about that, about us kind of about a lot of Christianity getting the message wrong in our day, is that all around us in our culture, people have lost any meta-narrative that's large enough for life. Do you know that word? A narrative is a story. So a meta-narrative is a story large enough to catch up all the smaller stories within it, up into itself, and explain them and give them meaning. And up until the 1950s, our culture had what people called the Judeo-Christian Meta-Narrative. That's what social scientists and philosophers called it. And it kind of framed how people thought about life. what they thought was good, and how they thought they should behave, and the kind of people that they thought they should be. That was the Judeo-Christian Meta-Narrative. And it was good. I think it had a lot of good things about it. But I don't think it ran deep enough, because the way it was thought of or experienced allowed people who believed in the Judeo-Christian meta-narrative to resist giving equality to black people. I mean, you do realize that most of the white people who resisted the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s were church-going people. But the meta-narrative they were caught up in didn't quite go far enough to see that. And it still allowed them to justify, for example, the terrible things that we did in Vietnam. And what happened was that these things began to disillusion the younger generation. They began to disillusion the generation that grew up going to Catholic church, going to Presbyterian church, going to Methodist church. And yet all the people caught up in that narrative still couldn't quite discern certain things that were really bad and certain things that were really good. And so it disillusioned this whole generation of young people, which is what we call, a little thing we call the 60s. But then a bunch of the hippie generation came to Jesus. And all these younger Christians, they called it the Jesus movement. I don't know if you ever heard of that. It was a big, mostly on the West Coast, but it spread across the country. And all these younger Christians, tens and tens of thousands of them, said, maybe it's about love. And the mainstream culture, the church said, well, come on in, but yeah, we don't think so. We don't think that's really what it's about. Linda and I watched a documentary the other night called The Jesus Music. Isn't that what it was called, right? On Netflix. And it traces all this modern Christian music that you guys love, including a lot of the style of music we play on Sunday mornings in our church. It traces all of that back to the guitar-playing hippie Christians of the Jesus movement. Nobody had guitars in church before the 60s. And it was really good. You should watch it. It's a fascinating history. But what struck me, one of the things that struck me when it was over, was how that simple message of love that was embraced by that young generation of hippie Christians, how that simple message of love got squeezed out of that generation as they got assimilated into the formal church. A lot of the love-loving hippies grew up to be angry fundamentalist Christians. And you go, how in the world did that happen? They lost the deeper meta-narrative that they were discovering on those California beaches, and the mainstream church never really bought into it. And now there is no larger meta-narrative in American culture, but there is a deep hunger for meaning, for life. As Jesus said, people are ripe for the message of the life of God, of how to find real hope and how to find real life. But Christians would have to hold out a better message, a better Jesus. And I guess what I'm saying is that Christians would have to themselves find the real story and throw out all their crappy versions of what Christianity is about. We haven't quite done that yet in our culture, or in the church in our culture. And so lots of people never ask the question. Lots of people aren't asking the question. Who is Jesus? What child is this? What does it mean? The second way the question gets asked is very lightly, out of a sort of nostalgic sentimentality among those who have some church background and who love the magic of the Christmas season, which, by the way, happens to describe me. I have some church background growing up, and I love the magic of the Christmas season. And so singing What Child Is This in the midst of all that, it warms my heart. So among many people, there's this affection for Jesus, and that affection, I think, is drawn out even more at Christmas time when we connect with Jesus as an infant. There's something about that. Perhaps because what we see in the baby Jesus is what we see in all babies. Something of innocence and purity that sparks our hope again that maybe there really is something good in humanity or something good that can come to humanity. So we feel warm feelings as we gaze on the infant Jesus amidst our Christmas trees and our twinkling lights and our presents under the tree and our family gatherings. And I don't think there's anything bad with all of that. I feel all of those things myself. I love the whole package. But for a lot of people who have some Christian background, that's kind of as far as it goes. The warmth of Christmas, in which the infant Jesus is one cast member, it never quite translates for a lot of people into asking the question more deeply. What child is this? What does it mean? Or into some kind of real and transforming journey in their heart and in their life. What I would say, if that describes you, if you're a person who, you like Christmas and think Jesus is great as part of Christmas and you have some affection there, but maybe it's never translated into being the center of your life journey, is I would just say this Christmas, pause a little longer as you consider the birth of Jesus into the world and ask a little more deeply what the meaning of this is. Because the Jesus who warms your heart in December can be the Jesus who fills your soul and changes your life in January. The third way I think the question gets asked is the way I think most people who are really Christians ask it. Most people who are serious about their Christian faith, who would say, yes, I have really come to believe in Jesus, when they ask the question, what child is this? I think they answer it mostly in terms of the child's identity. Well, this is Jesus Christ, who is God, come among us in the form of a man, who will grow up and die for our sins so that we can be admitted into heaven when we die. And all of that is true. In fact, it's not just true, it's glorious. This is what we believe as Christians, as 1 Timothy 1:15 says, that Christ came into the world to save sinners. I love how Paul finishes that statement, by the way. Christ came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am chief. And we are right to draw a line from Bethlehem to Golgotha, from the newborn king to the crucified king, from the manger to the cross, because the cross is the apex, the crescendo of Jesus' earthly ministry. In fact, I love what Hans Urs von Balthasar says, a quote that Mike Herzberger first turned me on to, and then I went and read volumes of von Balthasar because he's a theological genius with a deep heart. But he says that, paraphrasing it, he says that ironically, under the disfigurement of an ugly death and crucifixion, Christ is paradoxically the clearest Christ on the cross is paradoxically the clearest revelation of who God is. Man. So, yes, Jesus was born, and he died for us, and we get to spend eternity with God. But, did you know there was a but coming? But it is possible and often happens that we think of our faith and of Jesus in what we might call these most obvious and broad strokes, but miss the even more profound elements of what Jesus is really all about. It's like describing Beauty and the Beast by saying, well, this prince gets turned into a beast, and then a girl becomes a prisoner in his castle, and then he gets turned back into a prince again. You go, okay. Or like describing the movie Groundhog Day, if you know that film. It's a cult classic favorite of mine. It's like describing the movie Groundhog Day by saying, well, this guy gets stuck living the same day for years, but eventually he gets out of it. You go, oh. Or did you ever see the film Hoosiers? You may know the film Hoosiers, Gene Hackman. It would be like describing Hoosiers by saying, yeah, these high school boys from a really small town in Indiana end up winning the state championship. You know what that movie's really about? It's really about a coach working through his anger issues by beginning to really see people. It's about a father rediscovering a positive vision of life big enough to deliver him from his alcoholism, and it's about a boy discovering the meaning of forgiveness. It's like describing It's a Wonderful Life by saying that in the end, George doesn't lose the building alone. We would say, yeah, that's true, but there's something more than that at the heart of the story. If you describe all these stories in only their most obvious elements, what you miss is the transformative heart of every one of them. The part of the story, the process in the story, the magic of the story where the people are actually changed. The exact same thing is true with the story of Jesus. in every truly great story, somebody gets transformed. You know, I was thinking back this week across all the years of my Christian journey. It's been a long time now. And I was thinking back to the couple of churches that Linda and I were involved in before we foolishly came to Plainfield and started a church. And I don't really mean that. And I think back to all the people we were connected to in those church communities and everything we were excited about, right? So we were excited about being part of the right religion. We're Christians, right? We're not Muslims or Buddhists, man. We're Christians. And we were excited about the fact that we had the Bible, so we had the answer to everything we could ever ask. And we were excited about the fact that Jesus died for our sins and that we could have assurance of our final destination. And we missed it. With our Bibles in our hands, we missed the deepest thing, and frankly, in the end, the only thing that matters, which is so, can I say this in an Advent sermon? So stinking obvious to me now. The only thing that matters is you becoming a real human being, having all the rich and good aspects of your humanity restored. I think of Paul's words in Galatians, you know, everybody's arguing about circumcision back in the early church, right? Because Christianity came out of Judaism, and Jewish men had to be circumcised, and now does everybody have to be circumcised? You want to be a Christian? Do you have to become a Jew first? You know, all this stuff. And Paul, in exasperation at the end of Galatians, says, listen, I don't care about your doctrine that says you got to get circumcised, and I don't care about your doctrine that says no one has to be circumcised, and I don't care about anybody's doctrine about their opinion about anything that has to do with circumcision. And then he says this, because the only thing that counts. That's a pretty big statement. Are you with me? The only thing that counts, he says, is a new creation. Shut the front door. That's it. It makes me think of God's promise in Ezekiel. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you, and I will remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Makes me think of Paul's words in Ephesians 4, where he says, I urge you to put off concerning your old way of moving through life that old man, who is continually corrupted by chasing the wrong things, and be renewed in the spirit of your thinking, putting on the new man who was created in the mirror image of God, in whom everything is right and good. Lying in that manger is the new human being. That's what this child is. Don't miss it. Paul calls him the last Adam. Just stop and think about that for a second. First Adam, created, he's set in a garden. He's good. He's whole. He and Eve, they're just what human beings are meant to be until everything goes to you know what. And so Paul says, but this one who's born in Bethlehem, this is the last Adam. This is Adam redone. So there he is, the new human being who's going to take us back to the garden in every deepest sense that could possibly mean as human beings. And in that sense, I think the intuition that draws us to the innocence and purity and goodness of the baby in the manger, in that sense, I think it's spot on, because there it is in him. That's what we think of when we look at babies. We go, oh, until they cry and poop and all that stuff. But we look at babies and we say, there it is. There's the goodness right there. It hasn't all gone bad yet. They haven't become a jaded 15-year-old yet, and they haven't become a surly 40-year-old yet, and they haven't become a misguided, chasing all the wrong things 50-year-old yet. There it is in that beautiful baby. Maybe that's one of the reasons that he came into the world as a child, but there it is, a whole and good human being, the likes of which we had never seen. That's what people said about Jesus. Right? They go to arrest him. They don't arrest him. They come back, and the bosses of the temple guard say, "Why didn't you arrest him?" They said, "We never heard anybody talk like this before." Right? In him, we see a good, whole, centered, beautiful human being, the likes of which we had never seen and which we are destined to become. That's where this goes. It doesn't go to, I'm one of the good people and I'm going to the good place, and all those bad people going to the bad place, and, I'm in the right group and I believe the right things, and I got a big King James Bible to prove it, and, doesn't go all those places. It was a place where you become all the good, centered, and whole, beautiful, and true things that he is. When we sing Silent Night, Holy Night, it's because that's the night that we got our humanity back. It was born in front of us, right before our very eyes. So you see, to worship at Christmas, right? Because you're worshiping this morning. You're going to come to church next week and worship. You're going to come on Christmas Eve and really worship. So see, to worship at Christmas, it's not just to acknowledge the main elements of the story. Oh yeah, in the end we didn't lose the building and loan. That's good. It's not just to acknowledge the story. To worship at Christmas is to gaze on unblemished, good, beautiful humanity lying in a manger. The same unblemished, good, beautiful humanity which would one day hang on a cross, and to say to him, "Please make me new. Please make me new." Father, if I had a prayer for us in this church community this season, and I mean for us, me included, Lord, it would be that we would see this heart of the story. Not just the bones of it, but the life of it. The life of who you are, Emmanuel, God with us in our midst. The life of who you are, come to change the life of who we are. And it gives me such hope. Because, Lord, I admit, I'm 1,000 miles from home. I'm a work in progress. I got a long way to go. But all that goodness and wholeness and centeredness and loveliness and truth of who you are, that's what you're making me into. And that is hope. I will not fall off the edge of life and somehow be ruined in the end. In the end, I will be free. In the end, I will be whole. In the end, I will be good. And we will sit at your table. And we will eat. And we will laugh. And we will sing. Thank you for loving us.